What if I told you that one of the biggest threats to men's testosterone levels isn't aging, isn't genetics, and isn't even diet? It's stress. Chronic, unrelenting, everyday stress. And not just the kind you feel during a bad day at work, but the silent, biological stress response that's running in the background of your life. The kind that slowly rewires your hormones, your metabolism, your sleep, and even your fertility. Today we're going to explore what the best available scientific evidence says about how stress impacts men's hormones, and most importantly, what you can do about it. The stress response: survival at a cost. When you encounter a threat, your body activates the fight or flight response. This involves the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, also known as the HPA axis. Your brain signals your adrenal glands to release cortisol and adrenaline. In short bursts, this is life-saving. Your heart rate increases, blood pressure rises, energy is mobilized, you become sharper, faster, stronger. But here's the problem. Your body can't tell the difference between being chased by a predator and being stuck in traffic, drowning in debt, doom, scrolling social media, or worrying about your job. The stress response gets activated anyway. And when cortisol stays elevated chronically, it begins to suppress other hormone systems, especially the reproductive axis. Cortisol vs. testosterone, a hormonal tug of war. Testosterone production begins in the brain. The hypothalamus releases gene Rh, which tells the pituitary gland to release LH, which signals the testes to produce testosterone. But cortisol interferes at multiple points in this chain. Elevated cortisol can blunt Rh release. It can reduce LH secretion. It can directly inhibit testosterone production in the testes. In other words, stress tells your body, this is not a safe time to reproduce. From an evolutionary perspective, that makes sense. If you're running from danger, your body prioritizes survival over reproduction. But in modern life, many men are stuck in a constant state of low-grade stress, and the hormonal cost can be significant. Studies consistently show that men under chronic psychological stress tend to have lower testosterone levels. High-stress occupations, sleep deprivation, financial strain, relationship conflict, all have been associated with reduced testosterone. And it's not just about numbers on a lab report. Lower testosterone has been linked to fatigue, decreased muscle mass, increased abdominal fat, reduced libido, erectile dysfunction, depressed mood, and impaired cognitive performance. Stress, belly fat, and the hormonal spiral. It gets worse. Cortisol doesn't just suppress testosterone, it also promotes fat storage, particularly visceral fat. That deep abdominal fat isn't just a passive energy reserve, it's hormonally active tissue. Visceral fat contains high levels of the enzyme aromatase, which converts testosterone into estrogen. So now you have a double hit. Stress lowers testosterone production. Stress promotes belly fat, which further reduces testosterone by converting it into estrogen. This creates a vicious cycle. Lower testosterone can reduce motivation to exercise and impair metabolic health. Increased belly fat worsens insulin resistance. Insulin resistance further suppresses testosterone production. And the spiral continues. Stress and sleep. The hidden hormone killer. Let's talk about sleep. Testosterone production follows a circadian rhythm. Levels peak during the early morning hours, and much of that production occurs during deep sleep. Chronic stress disrupts sleep architecture. Elevated cortisol can delay sleep onset, fragment sleep, and reduce time spent in restorative slow-wave sleep. Even 1 week of sleep restriction, say 5 hours per night, has been shown to significantly reduce daytime testosterone levels in healthy young men. Now combine psychological stress with late-night screen exposure, caffeine, and irregular schedules, and you have a perfect storm for hormonal disruption. The role of inflammation. Chronic stress doesn't just raise cortisol, it also increases systemic inflammation. Psychological stress has been linked to elevated inflammatory markers such as C-reactive protein and interleukin-6. Inflammation, in turn, can impair Leydig cell function, the cells in the testes responsible for testosterone production. Inflammatory cytokines can also interfere with signaling between the brain and the reproductive organs. So stress key inflammation key reduce testosterone. And what increases inflammation? Poor diet, sedentary behavior, obesity, all of which are more likely under chronic stress. Stress, sexual health, and fertility. Testosterone isn't the only hormone affected. Chronic stress can impair sperm production and sperm quality. Elevated cortisol levels are associated with reduced sperm concentration and motility. Stress also affects sexual function directly. Anxiety activates the sympathetic nervous system, the same fight or flight response. But erections depend on the parasympathetic rest and digest system. You can't be in fight or flight mode and fully activate sexual function at the same time. This is why chronic stress is a major contributor to erectile dysfunction, even in younger men. Is it just psychological? Some might say, well, that's just in your head. But stress is not imaginary. Brain imaging studies show that chronic stress alters the structure and function of the hypothalamus and pituitary gland. Stress changes gene expression. It modifies hormone receptor sensitivity. This is biology. And while pharmaceutical companies might promote testosterone replacement therapy as a quick fix, that doesn't address the root cause. If stress is suppressing your natural production, adding external testosterone may temporarily raise blood levels, but it can further suppress your body's own hormonal signaling. The better approach is to ask, why is the system out of balance in the first place? What does the evidence suggest we can do? The good news is that lifestyle interventions can significantly modulate the stress response and improve hormonal health. Let's review the evidence-based strategies. 1. Physical activity. Regular exercise lowers baseline cortisol levels and improves stress resilience. Resistance training, in particular, has been shown to increase testosterone levels, especially in men with low baseline levels. But moderation matters. Excessive endurance training without adequate recovery can actually elevate cortisol and suppress testosterone. The sweet spot appears to be consistent moderate to vigorous activity with sufficient recovery. 2. Plant-rich diets and anti-inflammatory nutrition. Whole plant foods, fruits, vegetables, legumes, whole grains, nuts, and seeds are rich in antioxidants and anti-inflammatory compounds. Reducing systemic inflammation may help protect Leydig cell function and improve hormonal signaling. Fiber-rich diets also improve insulin sensitivity, which is closely tied to testosterone levels. And let's not forget diets high in ultra-processed foods and added sugars are associated with higher stress markers and lower testosterone levels. Food is information, and your hormones are listening. 3. Stress reduction practices. Mindfulness meditation, deep breathing exercises, yoga, and cognitive behavioral techniques have been shown to reduce cortisol levels. Even brief daily mindfulness practice can lower perceived stress and improve sleep quality. Time in nature, sometimes referred to as forest bathing, has been associated with reductions in cortisol and improvements in mood. You don't have to move to the mountains, but stepping away from screens and reconnecting with the physical world may have measurable hormonal benefits. 4. Sleep hygiene. Prioritize 7-9 hours of quality sleep. Maintain consistent sleep and wake times. Limit screen exposure before bed. Create a dark, cool sleep environment. Avoid caffeine late in the day. Protecting sleep may be one of the most powerful ways to support natural testosterone production. Rethinking masculinity and stress. There's also a cultural dimension. Many men are socialized to suppress emotions, push through exhaustion, and equate stress with productivity. But chronic stress is not a badge of honor. It's a biological burden. The data suggests that unmanaged stress doesn't just affect mental health, it can measurably impair hormonal function, metabolic health, and long-term vitality. Taking care of your stress response isn't weakness, it's physiology. The bottom line, stress is not just a feeling, it is a hormonal signal that reshapes the internal environment of the body. Chronic stress elevates cortisol. Elevated cortisol suppresses testosterone. Reduced testosterone impacts energy, mood, body composition, and sexual health. Add inflammation, poor sleep, visceral fat accumulation, and insulin resistance, and you have a cascade that can significantly undermine men's hormonal health. But the story doesn't end there. The same lifestyle factors that reduce stress, exercise, plant-forward nutrition, restorative sleep, mindfulness practices, social connection, are also the ones that support optimal hormone function. The body is remarkably adaptive. When you reduce chronic stress, you remove the signal telling your body that survival is the only priority. And when the body feels safe, it can return to balance, hormones included. When stress becomes chronic, the body remains in a prolonged state of fight or flight, and cortisol stays elevated far beyond its intended short-term role. Cortisol is not inherently harmful. It's essential for survival. In acute situations, it mobilizes energy, sharpens focus, and helps you respond to danger. But when psychological stress from work pressure, financial strain, lack of sleep, or constant digital stimulation keeps cortisol levels high day after day, the hormonal balance begins to shift in damaging ways. Testosterone production starts in the brain. The hypothalamus releases gonadotropin, releasing hormone, which signals the pituitary gland to produce luteinizing hormone. LH then travels to the testes and stimulates Leydig cells to produce testosterone. Chronically elevated cortisol interferes with this chain of communication at multiple points. It can blunt the release of GnRH from the hypothalamus, reduce LH output from the pituitary, and directly impair the ability of Leydig cells in the testes to synthesize testosterone efficiently. From a biological standpoint, this makes sense. When the body perceives ongoing stress, it prioritizes survival over reproduction. Energy is diverted toward immediate coping mechanisms rather than long-term reproductive functions. The result is a measurable decline in circulating testosterone levels. Over time, this suppression can contribute to fatigue, reduced muscle mass, increased abdominal fat, low libido, mood disturbances, and decreased motivation. What feels like just stress on the surface is actually a hormonal signal reshaping the body's internal environment. When cortisol remains high for extended periods, testosterone doesn't simply dip temporarily, it can remain chronically suppressed, reinforcing a cycle of low energy and diminished resilience that makes stress feel even harder to manage. When cortisol remains elevated for long periods, it changes the way the body stores energy. One of its primary jobs during stress is to ensure survival by increasing blood sugar and making fuel readily available. But chronically high cortisol also signals the body to store excess energy, particularly in the abdominal region. This leads to an increase in visceral fat, the deep belly fat that surrounds internal organs. Unlike the fat just under the skin, visceral fat is metabolically active and hormonally influential. Visceral fat contains high levels of an enzyme called aromatase. Aromatase converts testosterone into estrogen. This means that as abdominal fat increases, more testosterone is transformed into estrogen, lowering overall testosterone levels even further. The result is not just reduced hormone production, but increased hormone conversion working against you. This creates a self-reinforcing cycle. Elevated cortisol promotes visceral fat accumulation. More visceral fat increases aromatase activity. Higher aromatase activity reduces circulating testosterone. Lower testosterone can make it harder to maintain muscle mass and easier to accumulate additional fat. Reduced muscle mass lowers metabolic rate, making fat gain even more likely. And increased body fat can worsen insulin resistance, which further suppresses testosterone production. The hormonal shift doesn't just affect lab numbers. Men may notice declining strength, reduced motivation to exercise, increased fatigue, and changes in body composition that seem resistant to effort. What starts as stress-driven cortisol elevation gradually evolves into a metabolic and hormonal downward spiral. Breaking this cycle requires addressing the root trigger, chronic stress, while simultaneously improving body composition through movement, restorative sleep, and nutrient-dense foods. When visceral fat decreases, aromatase activity declines, and the hormonal environment can begin moving back toward balance. Testosterone follows a circadian rhythm, with the majority of daily production occurring during deep, restorative sleep, particularly during slow, wave sleep in the early part of the night. In healthy men, testosterone levels rise shortly after falling asleep, peak in the early morning hours, and gradually decline throughout the day. This nightly hormonal restoration is essential for maintaining energy, muscle mass, mood stability, libido, and metabolic health. Chronic stress interferes directly with this process. Elevated cortisol, especially in the evening, makes it harder to fall asleep and stay asleep. Instead of winding down, the brain remains in a state of hyperarousal. Stress activates the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight response, while quality sleep requires activation of the parasympathetic system, the rest and digest mode. These two states are biologically incompatible. You cannot be physiologically vigilant and deeply restorative at the same time. When stress fragments sleep, reduces total sleep duration, or shortens time spent in slow, wave sleep, testosterone production suffers. Even modest sleep restriction can have measurable effects. Research has shown that limiting sleep to just 5 hours per night for 1 week can significantly reduce daytime testosterone levels in young, healthy men. Over time, chronic sleep disruption compounds the problem, contributing to fatigue, reduced physical performance, impaired concentration, and lower sexual drive. The issue becomes cyclical. Low testosterone can worsen sleep quality, increase irritability, and reduce stress tolerance. Poor sleep raises cortisol the next day, further suppressing testosterone production the following night. Gradually, the body shifts into a pattern where hormone restoration never fully occurs. Protecting deep sleep? By managing stress, maintaining consistent sleep schedules, limiting late-night screen exposure, and creating a calm bedtime routine is not just about feeling rested. It is about preserving one of the body's most important natural hormone recovery mechanisms. Chronic psychological stress does more than elevate cortisol. It also activates the immune system in subtle but persistent ways. When the brain perceives ongoing stress, it signals the release of pro-inflammatory cytokines, chemical messengers such as interleukin-6 and tumor necrosis factor, alpha. While short-term inflammation is protective during injury or infection, long-term low-grade inflammation can quietly disrupt multiple hormonal systems, including those responsible for testosterone production. Testosterone is produced in the testes by specialized cells known as Leydig cells. These cells respond to luteinizing hormone from the pituitary gland, converting cholesterol into testosterone through a series of enzymatic reactions. However, inflammatory cytokines can interfere with this process. Research suggests that elevated inflammatory markers may impair Leydig cell responsiveness to LH, reduce the efficiency of testosterone synthesis, and even disrupt the enzymes involved in steroid hormone production. Inflammation can also affect the brain's hormonal signaling. Cytokines may blunt the release of gonadotropin, releasing hormone from the hypothalamus, and reduce LH secretion from the pituitary. This means stress-related inflammation can weaken testosterone production both centrally in the brain and peripherally in the testes. The result is often a gradual decline rather than a sudden crash. Men may experience reduced vitality, lower libido, diminished strength, and slower recovery from exercise. Over time, this inflammatory burden can compound other stress-related factors such as poor sleep, abdominal fat gain, and insulin resistance, all of which further suppress testosterone levels. What makes this particularly concerning is that chronic inflammation often operates below conscious awareness. You may not feel inflamed, yet the biochemical signals are influencing hormone output daily, reducing psychological stress, improving diet quality, increasing physical activity, and prioritizing restorative sleep can help lower systemic inflammation, supporting healthier Leydig cell function and more stable testosterone production. The good news is that men don't have to rely on hormone replacement therapy or pharmaceutical interventions to support testosterone levels. Lifestyle modifications, when applied consistently, can have a profound impact on hormonal health. Resistance training, for example, is one of the most effective natural ways to boost testosterone. Lifting weights or performing bodyweight exercises stimulates the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis, signaling the testes to produce more testosterone. Compound movements like squats, deadlifts, and bench presses are particularly effective because they engage large muscle groups, prompting a stronger hormonal response. Even moderate, regular resistance training can improve muscle mass, reduce abdominal fat, and enhance insulin sensitivity, all of which support a healthy testosterone environment. Nutrition also plays a pivotal role. Diets centered on whole plant-based foods, fruits, vegetables, legumes, whole grains, nuts, and seeds provide essential micronutrients and antioxidants that protect Leydig cells and optimize hormone production. Adequate protein and healthy fats are critical for the synthesis of testosterone, while minimizing ultra-processed foods and added sugars helps reduce inflammation and visceral fat, both of which can suppress testosterone. Fiber-rich foods improve insulin sensitivity, further creating favorable conditions for natural hormone balance. Sleep is another non-negotiable factor. Testosterone is primarily produced during deep, slow-wave sleep, so maintaining 7-9 hours of quality rest is essential. Consistent sleep schedules, a dark, cool bedroom, and minimizing late-night screen exposure can protect this natural hormonal rhythm. Without sufficient restorative sleep, the benefits of diet and exercise may be partially undermined. Finally, stress reduction practices such as mindfulness meditation, deep breathing, yoga, or time spent in nature lower cortisol levels, reduce systemic inflammation, and allow the body to prioritize reproductive and anabolic functions. Combined, these interventions create an internal environment where testosterone production can flourish naturally, enhancing energy, libido, mood, and overall vitality, without ever touching a prescription.